everyone. Thank you for being with us today. I'm Katie Starantino, the Director of Wellness Initiatives here at Friends Life Care. We have a very popular topic today. Our speaker is Morgan Everitt, and she is a death doula who is going to speak with us about navigating end-of-life decisions, a look at the 5 wishes.
Thank you so much, Katie. Hi, thanks so much for watching this. I'm going to be talking about navigating end-of-life decisions and a look at the 5 wishes. So today what we're going to go over, I'm just going to do a brief personal introduction of who I am, why I'm here talking to you. And I work as a death doula. So I'm going to do just a little overview of what a death doula is so you can sort of understand the lens from which I'm looking at this through. And also because people are often very curious and want to know. And then I'm going to talk a little about an issue I see as a death doula and sort of what the current common solutions are for that and how I think that those can be improved upon a little bit. And that's going to lead us into the 5 wishes. So I'm going to talk a little before the 5 wishes, but I will get into it, I promise. We're going to talk about using the 5 wishes and then the next steps you can take after completing them. And I guess we're not doing questions since it's recorded today, but if you have questions, you can always reach out and email me. Okay, so I'm Morgan Everitt. I'm an end-of-life doula, and I have a private practice in Bucks County called Heron's Flight. My background was growing up, I was always working with people with different disabilities and mental capacities. And then as I got older, went into companion and caretaker work with the elderly, and really loved it, made a lot of great connections and relationships and loved being around them. And then in 2015, my mom was diagnosed with a terminal illness. So I went home and helped take care of her for a year and a half. And that just really opened my eyes to so many things. I had not really had a front row seat before to the death and dying process. And it was pretty amazing to me that even though I had been working in that realm for a while, and my dad is actually a doctor, between the two of us, there were so many things about the end of life that we just didn't know. Um, and seeing just sort of some of the gaps in care and ways that things were happening, and some great things and some not so great things. And I remember having to Google a lot of things to find out answers and feeling like there should be someone here I can ask. So then moving forward, after my mom's death, when I heard about death doulas, I felt like, oh, that's exactly it. So I did my first training and certification at Mount Sinai Hospital in New York, and then went on to work on their palliative care floor, that was an amazing introduction to this world. And then we went into COVID, so I just sort of started absorbing all of the education I could find online. I did many more program certifications, and did lots of specialty courses in medical aid and dying and green burial and just kind of everything I could find. And then that went into sort of volunteering, working with family, friends, and the outreach getting a little further. And when I settled in Bucks County was when I started Heron's Flight. I'm currently in a Philadelphia End of Life Doula Collective as the Bucks County rep, member of the National End of Life Doula Alliance, and have a badge of proficiency from them, which is sort of like the close to a governing body of death doulas. So that's a little bit about me. And I'm going to go into what a death doula is. So this is something that could be talked about for a long time. So I'm going to try to summarize it. One of the most important things to note is that it's a non-medical position. So I don't do any prescribing or any medical advice. The closest I get is that I take notes as the hospice nurses are giving instructions and information to the caregivers, so the caregivers can really listen and absorb, and then I take down the notes and write them up. So I've learned how to spell a lot of long words, but other than that, I don't give medical advice. Um, It's really about the holistic end of life care, which can be a little tricky to verbalize sometimes because it's a huge range of things from practical, like helping fix someone's vacuum or make chocolate milk for someone. All these are all real examples. Um, to sitting up with someone and helping them through terminal agitation right before death. So it can really range a huge span. There's a lot of emotional, spiritual, practical support. And it's a pretty fluid position. So I can come into these scenarios and sort of see where the gaps are happening and help fill them and facilitate. And I think what's really cool with doulas is that it's a consistent presence. You always know it's going to be me. You always know I'm on the end of the phone. I'm the one that's going to show up, which I think is something really nice about that. And then I end up doing a lot of caregiver and family support. Sometimes it'll shift from working more with the person who's has a terminal illness to then helping more with the caregiver. It can really shift back and forth. And I work with people for a few months after the death of their person to help sort of bridge them back um, or forward, I should say. And then I also work as a referral resource. I really like to get to know the places around me so that I can refer out and get everyone as much help as possible. It really does take a village. And so I like to try to connect people and have good recommendations for people. And something also to note is that I work alongside palliative and hospice care. So this is not at all to take over that or get rid of that program in any way. I think hospice is an amazing program. And I always make sure my clients are on it. And I do a lot of work to kind of help people move through their misconceptions around hospice. I think it's so important. Um, and I kind of think of it as like if hospice was sort of this school you're going to, I'm your like private tutor that is with you through that. And it can work really smoothly as far as, I'll have the hospice nurse's number. I can sort of text them about changes I'm seeing. It's like a smooth handoff. So I found that works really well. And just the last point I'll touch on is that I absolutely respect and support the medical system, but I'm not a part of it. I don't. My boss is you and who I'm working for, not an insurance company or a larger hospital, which gives me a lot of flexibility, which is a pretty amazing aspect of it, and getting to choose the caseload and how long I spend with people. So that is a brief overview of what a death doula is. Again, if you have more questions, feel free to reach out. So I just want to talk a little bit about a really common thing that I see as a doula, that I remember noticing even, from my first experience with my mom and moving forward, is something that kind of inevitably happens is really decentering of the primary person. And what I mean by that is that a lot of times their wishes, even maybe small wishes, some of their nuances, their energy shifts, the little cues their body is giving about the dying process, a lot of the quieter things end up getting overlooked, which is really understandable because there's so much going on. Caretaker burnout is so real, as I'm sure some of you know. People have less sleep, they're eating differently, there's family descending upon the house, there's sometimes a hospice nurse, and there's aides, and there's a lot going on. There's a lot to figure out decision-wise and logistically. And then everyone has different opinions. Everyone might be remembering being told a different preference from somebody else. And so there can be tension, fighting, and even in the most harmonious circumstances, it's just difficult to make decisions during that time. We're so emotionally involved, and it's a new scenario and we're figuring everything out in real time, which is tough. So that leads to a diminished capacity for connection and really using these last months, weeks, days to really be with your person and connect and have those moments. It can also lead to some ruptures within families, or after your person dies, it can be really easy to loop and think about the decisions you made and whether they were right and whether you did the right thing. It's easy to sort of keep thinking those over and second guessing. So, the common way that people go about this is a lot of winging it, which again is really understandable because we're in a society and culture that is so scared of death and dying. And it is a sad, difficult thing, absolutely. But we've outsourced it so much, and it's such a taboo subject that it's so hard for us to talk about now, which is really doing us a disservice later on when we're in that scenario. So, as you'll see here, 70% of people are unable to make their own medical care decisions at the end of life. And I would venture to say the majority of people end up just not quite having the energy to be able to communicate and advocate, especially while getting to the very end. 80% of people think it's an important conversation, these planning conversations and figuring out how you're going to navigate this scenario. I would love to know what the other 20% are thinking. I don't know, but 80% know it's an important conversation. But actually, only 37% of adults have the two more straightforward advanced care documents, which is your living will and your medical power of attorney. And that's amazing. They have those filled out. But as you can see, there's a big discrepancy in how people are thinking and what's actually happening. So some more common solutions. One is I told them. So a lot of times someone will say, "Oh, I told my daughter I want to be cremated," which is great, and absolutely advocate for these conversations. And I'm so glad when people say that they have talked about that. It can just be a little tricky when it's not really written down and documented somewhere. I've definitely seen people remembering different things or being told different things, or maybe contradictory things. And also when it's just coming up and you're just sort of doing it on a basis of when you think about something, that can be tricky because you'll, I think, inevitably leave out several decisions. Um, but again, just having that conversation is fantastic. And then another common solution is that I did do it, which is also amazing. So that would be the two more straightforward things that you can get these forms from the state. Sometimes people work on them with an attorney, which is the medical power of attorney and the living will. And that's great to have those done. And at the same time, they leave out a lot of really nuanced decisions that end up making a huge impact and difference at the end of life. So, how do I think this can be improved? I think this can be improved with, okay, the use of a more comprehensive advance directive that includes specific scenarios, room for personal definitions, and thought provoking questions around the care and emotional aspects of the end of life, such as the five wishes. So, the five wishes it's this little booklet that's a guide that helps you think about and communicate what matters most to you. And it does work as a legal advance directive, which is really cool. And it's very accessible and easy to order and fill out, as we'll get into. But I love that it really works as a legal document. And it goes through the first two, the medical power of attorney and living will, and then it goes into some very unique things about five wishes. So, what does five wishes address? So the first wish is choosing the person you want to make healthcare decisions for you when you can't make them for yourself. And I've already mentioned it several times, the medical power of attorney, which I'm sure a lot of you are familiar with. The second one is the kind of medical treatment that you do or don't want, which is the living will, which you also might be more familiar with. And then the third, fourth, and fifth are the ones that are unique to five wishes. what comfort measures you want taken, how you want to be treated, and what you want your loved ones to know. Oh, and just to fill in a little bit of the history of Five Wishes that I just think is really interesting, is this was created back in 1996 by a man that was the legal counsel for Mother Teresa. And he was really struck by the work she did in keeping people's dignity at the end of life. So he, with his organization, Aging with Dignity, created Five Wishes with the help of the American Bar Association. And that's how they came up with this. And it has both the personal and the legal. So, Wish One is the medical power of attorney, the person I want to make healthcare decisions for me when I can't make them for myself. Um, And this, I think what's really good with Five Wishes is that it lays out important things to think about when you're picking out who you want your proxy to be. Because a lot of times we'll do our default, oh, like, oh, my spouse or my kid. Um, but actually thinking through and thinking of who is someone that can be very rational and clear in a more crisis state or a high emotional place, because often our default person is the person that's also going to be the most emotionally involved. And when you're really emotional, it's very hard to kind of access the decision making part of your brain and see things from different sides. So it's just something to take into account. And your person absolutely might be someone that's very clear in crisis, even when they're emotionally involved. Um, so it's really going to vary from person to person, but it's just a good thing to think about. And then another thing that it talks about is just the different examples of things that your medical power of attorney might have to, like decisions they might have to make, which I think is super helpful because we think of it so much in an abstract way, and we know that they might have to make some decisions. And this really lays out what some of those are. So, for example, it might be donate usable organs or tissues of mine as allowed by law, make the decision to request, take away, or not give medical treatments, move me to another state to get the care I need to carry out my wishes. So I just find that really helpful to really think about and get some examples of what those decisions actually are. And this only goes into effect when you are too sick or hurt to communicate for yourself. So you'll never be, no one's going to override you. Once you fill this out, you are still in charge of your medical care. Absolutely. It only comes into effect when people are in a place where there's no ability to communicate. So moving on to wish two. I'm just going to take a quick sip of water. Wish two is the living will, which is another one you might be more familiar with. And that's about what kind of medical treatment you do or don't want. Um, and this is such an important thing to go through. I think, especially because in this booklet, they give you space to write down your personal definition of what life support is. So, a lot of times, living will is dealing with whether you want life support treatment or not. But a lot of times we talk about life support or we talk about, I don't want life support, I don't want heroic measures, but we don't actually define what those mean. And they can actually mean really different things to different people. For some people, it's intubation. For other people, it's getting a feeding tube or getting an extra surgery. So it's really good to just define for yourself and others what that means for you. Um, and then it gives some examples of scenarios that there might be. And then they give sort of three different options of wanting life support, not wanting life support, and then sort of using the doctor's discretion. And then, of course, there's still space to write down your own personal thoughts and wishes. Um, and I actually had a client who I was working with the other day who was going through this and saying how she felt like she could write an essay in here of all of the things she's thinking. And I kind of said, go for it, because I think when we're in a place where we're trying to make these huge decisions for someone else, The more information, the better. So, really personalizing it, I think, is something that will be so helpful. And it's truthfully, they can be difficult scenarios to read through and imagine yourself in. Um, but again, it's just so helpful and important for the future and for the people that are going to be helping you and for yourself. So, wish three. Wish three is how comfortable I want to be. So now we're moving into the more personal, unique to five wishes part. So, how comfortable I want to be is such a great thing to talk about and really get into the details of. In five wishes, they give you a list of different things to think about of things that would help make you feel comfortable, and you can cross out the ones that you don't like and you can amend and add more things. One thing that's really good to discuss is how you feel about pain management, because a lot of times pain medications will make you feel kind of groggy and out of it, and some people want as much pain medication as it takes to feel no pain. Other people want to be able to stay more alert and cognizant and really want less of that medication. So that's just something helpful to think through um, beforehand. And again, if I didn't mention this, you can always go in and change these. It's not written in stone. And if you're communicating for yourself and you're asking, maybe an example, you're asking for more pain medication, they're not going to say, oh, it says here though that you don't want any. You'll still be able to communicate and advocate for yourself. It's just great stuff to think through. um, an example of sort of how I personalized and amended mine, just to give you an idea of sort of some of the little things that to think about that might be specific to you. One of them is I wish to have warm baths often. I wish to be kept fresh and clean at all times. And yes, that sounds amazing. And in general, yes. And then I amended a little bit just because I've seen people at the end of life sometimes consistent sheet changing and bathing can be more disruptive and difficult, especially if someone's in pain. So I just want to alleviate my caregivers of that stress, knowing that it's okay to not change my sheets if it seems like it's disturbing me or is too painful. I trust people's discretion in that. So that's just an example of a really detailed thing. Some of the other things are cool, moist cloth put on my head if I have a fever. Um, I wish to be massaged with warm oils as often as I can be. There's stuff about bed linens, spiritual care, religious and spiritual readings, or of course any type of reading, any book you love. Those are so helpful to have written down, especially because they give people that are visiting you a really clear thing to do if they don't know what to say. If they see that you have written down something that you would love to be read out loud, it's a great way to have someone come visit and spend time, and it takes the stress off of figuring out what to do. So writing down ahead of time some things that you'd love to hear is a great idea. So, oh, and then personal hygiene. Um, Another thing it talks about is, do you want your hair brushed? Do you want your nails clipped? Do you want your nails painted? Some of those things that I think some people would love to have done and some people would hate to have done. Some people want to feel clean shaven and more, or maybe lipstick, more like themselves, and other people just sort of want to be left alone. Um, and so that's something that you can sort of talk about and hear ahead of time. And then again, it's always changeable. Wish for how I want people to treat me. This is what others should keep in mind if you become seriously ill. So just gathering. This is a really helpful one. because we kind of all feel in general like, well, I want everyone to be kind or patient, or we can feel like we're all on the same page as everyone, but it's really helpful to just verbalize actually what would feel the most helpful and comforting to you. As far as like, do you like your hand held? Do you want someone lying in bed with you, or do you want space? Um, just to start brainstorming these things and even writing down, just knowing that these are things that maybe you can think about in the future. Um, it's just those little nuanced things that we don't really anticipate. So one of them will be, I wish to have people with me when possible. I want someone to be with me when it seems that death may come at any time. Um, and again, I've definitely seen people change their minds on these things and feel like, oh, I'm going to want someone with me all the time. And then they get to it and they want a little more space. Um, I wish to have others by my side when possible. I want to be visited by a chaplain. So some different things like that. And then pictures and having pictures around your bed. And I will say a helpful tip for pictures around your bed is just to make sure that you put it, or if you're helping someone else, you put it in their eye line. So where they are in bed, they can see it easily. Another one is I wish to have my favorite music played when possible until my time of death. And I think that's a really great one to go through. I had a client this past summer who she loved Aerosmith, her absolute favorite. And she going through and working on this with her, she realized she really didn't want to hear Aerosmith as she was going through the dying process. And when her sister came into town and was looking through the booklet, she was like, "Oh my gosh, I wouldn't have guessed she didn't want to hear Aerosmith." So that's an example of how we can know each other so well and yet still not quite know all of the little decisions and how things are going to feel. And moving on to wish five is what I want loved ones to know. So this is a really important one and one that's great to just think about in an ongoing way, really. And it's one page for it, but you can certainly do your own work on it. I've worked with clients on writing letters to people and that kind of thing. But this is great for brainstorming. As far as, I wish to be forgiven for the times I've hurt family, friends, and others. I wish for my family and friends and caregivers to respect my wishes, even if they don't agree with them. I wish for all of my family members to make peace with each other before my death, if they can. Things like that. And of course, you can amend it. You can cross out ones that you don't agree with or need. And it's just great to think through the people in your life and if there are any things you want to say. And what's helpful is that if you don't have the bandwidth to be saying it out loud, it gives you have a space to be able to write it down. And then this becomes a really important document for people, especially if their person filled this out in handwriting. Um, this becomes a really cherished piece of that, to have your person's thoughts and feelings and wishes in their own handwriting written down is really invaluable. And then it also goes through, um, whether you'd like to be buried or cremated, things that you wish to be done with your body after you die. And I know that these are hard things to think about, so I'm not at all trying to say go in there and make some decisions. I know that it's really hard to think about and talk through. I will say I think it's great, um, while we have the time and the bandwidth to be able to look into different options and think about what we want to do. Because a lot of times people will, they have a funeral home that's done relatives and, oh, I'm just going there and they're going to cremate me there. But there's actually a lot of different options, especially now, with green burials and even aquamation. There's these different things that are available that are really interesting to look into, rather than this being sort of an afterthought or a default. And then it goes into talking a little bit about your memorial, and things that you might want for that. And I'm sure that you've seen sometimes there's more of like a canned memorial that's doesn't feel as specific to that person. And then another memorial you've been to that's been really personal and you feel like you've gotten to know that person even more than you did before. And it does make a big difference. And one of the things that facilitates that type of memorial is knowing the person's wishes, before they're gone. And it can be a really healing, amazing thing when you're putting together a memorial to know that you're carrying out these wishes of your person. For example, because sky's kind of the limit. For example, my mom asked everyone to wear a piece of leopard print to her memorial, and it was amazing. And I felt like she would have absolutely loved it. And I loved that she made that personalization, and that was something that she was thinking about, and it still makes me smile now. um, but even just talking about songs that you might like played, and readings and things, you don't have to plan the whole shebang right now. Just some stuff to think about, and some guidelines for people. So I know that this might be a little overwhelming going through all of the five wishes, back to back fairly quickly. Um, and so I hope these are just sort of seeds that I can plant that you can start brainstorming on. I did want to go through a few additional thoughts, that I have as a doula that I like to work through with people, that aren't necessarily in this document. Um, Especially about noise, voice volume, side conversations. I think for myself, I'm very sensitive to noise and amounts of people. So this is something that I would want to specify before I lost my energy and ability to advocate and communicate, because the dying process, it is work. It's its own type of labor, and a lot of times people go very inward during it, and it's just very hard to communicate and advocate for yourself. um to have the energy to tell someone to turn the TV off. So talking about that beforehand is really helpful. As far as, yeah, do you want to make sure the TV is off, or are there specific TV shows you want to watch? Do you want people to be aware and careful of the volume of their voice? Do you have any really loud talkers in your family that you might want them to think about bringing it down a little bit when they come to visit? Um, do you want side conversations to be done in a different room, or have people step out of in the hallway? And I know that this is stuff for really close to the very end, and it makes a huge impact on the experience. Do you want to make sure people aren't taking phone calls in your room? You want to make sure people's phones are on silent. Um, and of course, everyone's going to be trying their best. I'm not saying that this, you'll make all these things and everyone will be perfect, but it's so helpful to have these written down, because it takes a lot of the emotion out of it. So, for example, as I was with my grandmother through her death, the news was on really loudly. And I felt too uncomfortable to tell my extended family that we needed to turn it off. Um, be, I just, I felt nervous about it. And it would be so helpful, and has been, and I've seen this be really helpful moving forward, if I could have just been like, oh, she actually wrote down here she doesn't want the TV on. So then it makes it less about an issue between two people, telling someone they're too loud, and it just becomes about fulfilling someone's wishes, which is just makes for a much smoother time, and is very helpful. And another thing to think about is just visitors and maybe max amount of visitors you would want around. Are you okay with unscheduled visitors? So again, I know this is a lot of detail and stuff to think about, but I just hope it'll get percolating a little bit. Uh, all right, moving forward. So, what to do next after you go through the five wishes? You absolutely want to have conversations with people, talk about it with people who are closest to you, maybe inspire other people to do this type of thing. Um, and then you want to definitely tell the person that you've named as your medical power of attorney so they know and they're not surprised later on. And you can maybe even talk through some of the decisions you made, which might be really helpful for them. And then going through and signing and making this a legal document is actually very straightforward. Sometimes when people hear legal document and signing, it feels like, oh, I've got to make an appointment and I've got to go somewhere. But what's great with this is you sign your name and then you have two other witnesses sign it, and that's all you need. Um, the witnesses can't be your medical power of attorney. But other than that, it can be anyone, and they don't even have to read through the booklet. You just need two people to sign. And actually, in Pennsylvania, it doesn't need to be notarized in order to be legal. It doesn't hurt if that's something you feel strongly about wanting to do. But I think it's great to know that you don't have to get it notarized. And after completing the five wishes, so you want to give some copies out, maybe to people close to you, significant people, your medical power of attorney, potentially your primary care physician. And then you want to make sure you have one for yourself and keep it in an accessible place. So, not a safety deposit box, since those are designed to keep people out of them. But a lot of people find the fridge a very helpful focal point. So maybe keeping it on top of the fridge, sometimes in the fridge. It's just an easy place to remember and tell other people where it is. Um, and then there's also an online version of Five Wishes. Uh, Five Wishes, interestingly, they kind of treat their online version as a little bit more of the kind of concrete version, which I know is a little antithetical to having a physical copy. But with this, you can do it in pencil and really easily erase things, redo things. Online, anytime you make little changes, it alerts your medical power of attorney, which is great. And at the same time, makes it a little tricky to, log in and keep making little changes. So they sort of suggest you might want to go through this physical copy first, before doing the online version. But of course, you can still absolutely change the things that are online or only do the online version. That's absolutely all okay too. And then I'd say after that, even after doing a little bit of this, I'd say even after just watching this, celebrate, get yourself something really good to eat that you enjoy, or go do something that brings you happiness. If these things were easy to talk about and make decisions about, everyone would do them. And everyone does not do them. It's it's not easy, and it's an amazing gift that you're giving to yourself and to the people around you. And it's a really incredible thing to spend some time and energy on. So even just watching this today, going through these things, I'm food motivated. So I like to give myself a cookie or something afterwards. And then as far as continuing the conversation, because it is just good to keep talking and being open about these things. A little like how I mentioned at the beginning, how our society is so frightened of talking about this, and that actually just really amplifies the anxiety and fear. Um, I find often when people talk about it, learn more about it, they feel less anxious and actually lighter, because it's inside of us. So getting it out is really helpful. Um, so there are actually a bunch of card games that facilitate conversations around death. The death deck is great. It has these three all have sort of a range of some more sort of sentimental or serious, or some really funny, or what animal would you come back as? Those kinds of just interesting, thought-provoking questions. And then events, as far as you might have heard of death cafes. I know over COVID, a lot of them moved online, but they're still great to check out on there. And then there's another kind of version of that called Death Over Drafts, which is over some beer, of course, and kind of the same idea of talking and having conversations. And then these websites, so fivewishes.org is where you're going to go to order your copy of this booklet if you want. It's a well laid out website. I think you'll be able to find it. I believe that the physical copies are $5. I should check. Don't quote me on that. But you'll find a way to order these if you check out that website. And then the Conversation Project and the End Well Project are both just really helpful resources. They're really good websites that talk about planning and things to think about. So I started to make a book list for this slide, and it became too long. So if anyone needs any book recommendations, feel free to reach out, because there's a ton of amazing ones.